The entire hall froze when the alien queen's child chose me without hesitation. Eric Dalen had never felt so small in his life. The transport shuttle hummed quietly as it descended toward the alien planet, a world that shimmered in colors that humans had no names for. The sky was a swirl of teal and silver, streaked with floating ribbons of light that danced like auroras. As the shuttle broke through the upper atmosphere, Eric pressed his hands against the cool glass and stared at the sprawling city below. Towering structures twisted toward the sky, each one alive in its own way, their surfaces glowing faintly as if the buildings themselves were breathing. He was a diplomat, yes, trained in negotiation and conflict resolution, but the scale of the Zarathian Empire's capital was more than he could have imagined. The ship landed gently on a platform suspended high above the ground, and Eric could feel the vibrations of the city through the soles of his boots. The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss, and a pair of alien attendants stepped forward. They were tall, their limbs longer than human norms, with skin that shimmered faintly like liquid silver. Their eyes were large and black, reflecting the city around them with perfect clarity. "Captain Eric Dalen," one of them said in a voice that resonated more than it spoke, "the Queen awaits your presence. Follow us." Eric nodded and followed. Each step he took echoed in the hall of the landing platform. The walkway twisted and curved like a river, glowing lines along the edges lighting their path. He could hear faint whispers from the attendants, though he could not understand the language. Everything about this world was alien, yet elegant. The palace itself rose ahead, more magnificent than anything Eric had ever seen. Spires pierced the sky and bridges connected towers in impossible geometries. The main hall, he was told, was where the Zarathian queen, Zyralia, received her guests. Even from this distance, he could feel the weight of the empire pressing down, the presence of centuries of rulers who had shaped their world with intellect and strategy. The attendants led him through a series of halls that curved and spiraled, with walls that seemed alive, pulsing faintly under his gaze. Finally, they reached the main throne hall. Eric's jaw tightened as he stepped inside. The room was immense, wider than any human cathedral he had ever visited. The floor shimmered with a translucent material that reflected the alien light, making it seem as though he were walking on liquid crystal. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, sat the queen. Her presence was commanding. She was taller than a human, her skin a deep, radiant purple, and her eyes glowed faintly, a color that seemed impossible yet mesmerizing. Around her, alien ministers and nobles waited, their expressions unreadable. But it was not the queen who drew all the attention. A small figure moved forward from beside the throne, her steps light and confident. Eric felt a sudden, unexplainable pull in his chest. The child was unlike anything he had seen. She was not fully grown, perhaps 12 by human standards, but there was a sharp intelligence in her eyes, a focus that seemed far beyond her years. Her hair shimmered with streaks of silver and violet, and her eyes reflected the room as if she could see through it. The whispers in the hall grew louder. No one approached the child, not even the highest-ranking nobles. She had a reputation for unpredictability, for testing those who came before her. Many had failed, leaving in shame or fear. Eric felt a bead of sweat on his forehead, though he was unsure if it was fear, anticipation, or something else entirely. The child stopped a few steps from him and tilted her head, studying him. Her gaze was sharp, unflinching, yet there was a hint of curiosity. Eric bowed instinctively, unsure if it was the correct gesture. The child said nothing, but the silence in the hall was deafening. Ministers exchanged worried glances. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into stunned silence. Eric cleared his throat. "Princess Leora," he said cautiously, using the name he had been told, "it is an honor to meet you." She did not respond immediately. Instead, she took a step closer, her gaze never leaving him. The hall seemed to shrink in that moment, the grandeur fading into the background. Eric felt as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting. The silence was thick, almost unbearable. Then slowly the child extended her hand. Eric froze. Every protocol, every lesson in diplomacy screamed at him to wait, to observe, to be cautious. The ministers around her shifted nervously, some whispering urgently, others glaring at Eric as if he had committed an unforgivable offense by being present. But Eric felt a pull he could not explain. He stepped forward carefully and took her hand. It was small, warm, and surprisingly firm. She held it with confidence, and the simple act seemed to electrify the hall. The queen leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. The child pressed a small, crystalline token into his palm. It was delicate and intricate, glowing faintly from within. Eric turned it over in his hand, feeling the weight of it. The hall gasped collectively, and Eric realized this was no ordinary gesture. In the Zarathian culture, such a gift from the air was a signal of trust, a bond that few outsiders ever received. The room was frozen in disbelief. Eric struggled to find words. "I thank you," he said carefully, bowing again. The child simply nodded, her gaze still steady, unyielding. He could feel the curiosity and intelligence behind her eyes, an awareness that seemed to measure him in ways he had never imagined. The queen finally spoke. Her voice was calm, authoritative, yet it carried an undertone that suggested both pride and caution. "You are aware," she said, "that this choice carries consequences beyond what you can comprehend." Eric nodded. "I understand, Your Majesty. I will do my best to honor it." The queen's eyes softened slightly, but the ministers were less forgiving. Some of them whispered harshly, questioning the human suitability, claiming he might be a threat or a fool. Others watched silently, trying to read the subtle expressions of their ruler and heir. Eric realized immediately that he had just entered a world where every gesture, every word, was measured for its meaning. A single misstep could unravel not only his position, but the fragile trust between humanity and the Zarathian Empire. The child, Leora, finally released his hand. She stepped back and tilted her head slightly, studying him again. It was as if she was making her own silent judgment, testing not just his courage, but his heart, his patience, his willingness to see the world as she did. Eric felt a strange calm wash over him. For years, he had trained for diplomacy, for negotiation, for the kind of high-stakes situations that could mean war or peace. But this was different. This was not about treaties or power. It was about trust, about connection, and about proving that humanity could stand among the stars not through force, but through courage, integrity, and understanding. The queen finally gestured for him to rise. "You will be allowed to remain in the palace under observation until your intentions are clear," she said. "Consider this a period of learning." Eric bowed. "I will not fail you, Your Majesty." As he followed the attendants out of the hall, the whispers and murmurs continued. Some were skeptical, some curious, but all eyes were on him. He felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The crystalline token in his hand pulsed faintly, almost as if it contained the heartbeat of the palace itself. That night, Eric could not sleep. He lay in a chamber prepared for him, high above the city, the walls glowing faintly in rhythm with the distant lights below. He thought about the child, Leora, and the strange bond they had formed in just a few minutes. He wondered what it meant, how far it would go, and what dangers lay ahead. The palace was magnificent, but magnificent things often hid shadows. As he stared out at the city, he realized that his mission had changed. He had not come here to simply negotiate or observe. He had come to understand, to build trust in a world that had long been suspicious of humans. And somehow, a child of a queen had chosen him, without hesitation, to begin that journey. Sleep finally came in the early hours, but even in his dreams, the image of Leora's eyes stayed with him. They were intelligent, piercing, and somehow kind. Eric knew that whatever the future held, his life, and perhaps humanity's place among the stars, was about to be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. The next morning, he would meet the ministers, learn the rules of the court, and face challenges designed to test his worth. But for now, in the quiet of the palace, he allowed himself a small measure of hope. For the first time in his life, he felt that humans could belong in this vast, alien galaxy, and that one small choice, made by an unexpected child, might be the key to everything. The hall may have frozen when Leora had chosen him, but Eric's heart was moving forward, eager to prove that trust, courage, and integrity could bridge even the widest gap between worlds. The palace felt different the next morning. The halls that had seemed so vast and cold the day before now held a quiet tension. Eric Dalen moved carefully through the corridors, escorted by two attendants whose skin shimmered faintly under the light. Every step he took seemed amplified in the empty spaces, the walls reflecting his movements back at him as if the building itself was watching. He had spent the night thinking about Princess Leora. The way she had chosen him so freely, without hesitation, had startled him. He had grown up learning that trust had to be earned, that every gesture carried weight, and yet here was a child who had decided, instantly, that he was someone to believe in. The crystal token in his pocket seemed to pulse faintly, as though it shared her certainty. Eric knew he could not allow himself to be complacent. The Zarathian court was a place of scrutiny and subtle power. Every whisper, every glance could carry meaning, and he was aware that some of the ministers were already questioning the wisdom of the princess's choice. He had to prove himself, not through words alone but through action, intelligence, and integrity. When he reached the central hall, he found a group of ministers gathered in discussion. Their forms were elegant, elongated, and their skin glimmered with a faint metallic sheen. They paused as he approached, their large black eyes studying him intently. One of them, a tall figure with silver streaks across his arms, stepped forward. "Captain Dalen," the minister said, his voice smooth and deliberate, "the princess has made an unusual decision. You understand that your presence here is under close observation. We must ensure that your intentions align with the interests of the Empire." Eric inclined his head respectfully. "I understand, and I intend to demonstrate my commitment. I am here to serve as a bridge between our peoples, not to disrupt the order of your court." The minister's gaze did not soften, but he nodded. "We will see." Eric spent the morning being introduced to the intricate workings of the palace. He learned that every corridor, every chamber, even the way the lights shifted, had a purpose. The Zarathians had built their world around efficiency, control, and beauty, and every detail reflected centuries of careful planning. He realized quickly that he would have to navigate not only the political structure, but also the subtle cultural cues that could betray misunderstanding. By midday, he was led to a chamber where Princess Leora awaited him. She was sitting on a low platform, her legs crossed, with a table of small, holographic devices in front of her. Her eyes lifted as he entered, and a faint smile curved her lips. "Good morning, Captain Dalen," she said, her voice clear and precise. "I hope you slept well." Eric inclined his head. "I did, Princess. Thank you," she gestured to the table. "We have work to do. You will need to understand how our people communicate, how our strategies are formed. You cannot rely on words alone here. You must learn to see the patterns, to read the subtle cues." Eric studied the devices. Each one displayed shifting symbols, moving patterns, and glowing lines. To a human untrained in Zarathian ways, it might have seemed like a game, but Leora's hands moved with precision, arranging the pieces in a sequence that revealed a map of influence, resources, and alliances within the Empire. "This is how we test understanding," she explained. "Observe the system, identify the critical points, and predict the outcomes. Humans often rely on force or argument, but here, subtlety is more powerful." Eric leaned forward, studying the display carefully. He noticed patterns in the glowing lines that corresponded to the movement of resources across the empire, the influence of different ministers, and the unspoken hierarchy that determined decision-making. He suggested a few adjustments to optimize the flow, careful not to overstep. Leora's eyes widened slightly. "That is clever," she said softly. "You see the connections in a way I did not expect." The day passed in lessons and observations. Eric learned not only the mechanics of Zarathian strategy, but also the rhythm of their culture, the pauses in conversation, the way a gesture could communicate approval or doubt, the way silence could hold more meaning than words. Each lesson revealed more about the princess and her people, and each revelation deepened his respect for the civilization he had once underestimated. During a quiet moment in the afternoon, Leora led him to a balcony overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking. Towers twisted into the sky, connected by bridges that seemed to float on light. The streets below glimmered with activity, though there were no sounds he could hear. He realized that the Zarathians had designed the city to harmonize with their senses, creating an environment that was both functional and beautiful. "You are not like the others," Leora said, her voice breaking the silence. "Most humans would be overwhelmed, intimidated, or afraid. But you observe, you adapt, and you respect the rules without losing yourself." Eric felt a flush of pride. "I have had good teachers, Princess, and I have learned that fear and pride do not win respect. Understanding does." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Perhaps that is why I chose you." He was about to respond when a loud chime echoed through the palace. Attendants rushed past them, their forms blurring in a shimmer of light. Leora's eyes narrowed. "It seems we have our first test," she said. "Follow me." They moved quickly through the palace, descending into lower chambers that were designed for simulations, training, and observation. Eric realized that the tests he had heard about were not only for aliens. Humans were expected to prove themselves in these exercises, to demonstrate their loyalty, intelligence, and courage. The first scenario was unexpected. Holographic projections filled the room, creating a landscape that seemed real. Alien adversaries moved with precision, attempting to capture a simulated strategic resource. Eric's task was simple in words but complex in execution: protect the resource without harming anyone, and do so efficiently. He moved cautiously, observing the patterns of the holographic figures. Using both human ingenuity and the principles Leora had just taught him, he directed the simulation with precision. He anticipated the moves, guided the allies, and neutralized threats without conflict. Leora watched silently, her expression unreadable, but Eric felt a quiet sense of approval in her gaze. When the simulation ended, the projections dissolved, leaving the chamber empty. Leora stepped forward and clapped her hands lightly. "Well done, Captain Dalen. You understand more than I expected." The ministers observing from the side murmured among themselves. Some nodded subtly, acknowledging his skill, while others frowned, still cautious. Eric realized that while he had made progress, he was only at the beginning of a long path. Trust was fragile here, and one mistake could undo everything. As evening approached, Eric was escorted back to his chamber. The crystal token in his pocket pulsed faintly again. He realized that it was more than a symbol, it was a reminder of responsibility. He had been chosen by a child of immense intelligence and authority, and that choice carried consequences beyond his imagination. In the quiet of his room, he reflected on the day. Leora was extraordinary, not just in her abilities, but in her capacity to see potential in others. She had chosen him not for his rank or power, but for his character, his courage, and his willingness to engage with her world respectfully. Sleep came more easily that night, but even as he drifted off, he thought about the ministers' skeptical glances, the delicate balance of politics, and the challenges that awaited. Tomorrow, the tests would become harder, the scenarios more complex. He knew he would face doubts, opposition, and danger, but he also knew he could not turn away. For the first time, Eric understood that his mission was no longer just about diplomacy. It was about proving the worth of humanity, not through conquest or dominance, but through intelligence, courage, and the ability to form bonds that transcended species. And somehow, the trust of one extraordinary child had opened the door. The stars outside the palace shimmered faintly, mirroring the lights of the city below. Eric felt a sense of purpose he had never known. The path ahead was uncertain, but with each step, he would honor the choice made by Princess Leora. And in doing so, he might change the relationship between their two worlds forever. The palace had grown quieter over the next few days, but the silence carried a weight that pressed on Eric. He moved through the halls with a cautious confidence now, aware that every step, every glance, and every word was observed and interpreted. The ministers watched him closely, some with curiosity, others with suspicion, and he felt the subtle tension of being a human in a world that valued precision and discipline above all else. Princess Leora had taken it upon herself to guide him. She led him to chambers that were filled with strange devices, each one a puzzle, a test, or a simulation designed to measure more than raw intelligence. She explained the purpose of each. Here you learn patience. Here you learn observation. Here you learn strategy. Eric appreciated her approach. The lessons were challenging, but they made him think differently. Humans often relied on instinct and improvisation, but the Zarathians prized forethought and subtlety. He began to see how their minds worked, how they saw the world as a complex web of cause and effect, where every action rippled outward in unseen ways. One afternoon, Leora introduced a new exercise. The chamber filled with holographic projections that created a miniature version of the palace and surrounding city. The projections moved as though alive, simulating political situations, rival factions, and potential crises. Eric's task was to navigate these events and make decisions that would maintain balance without causing harm. He studied the projections carefully. Each figure, each movement, had a pattern. By observing quietly, he could anticipate conflicts, identify allies, and make choices that minimized risk while maximizing stability. Leora watched him intently, her eyes following every motion of his hands and every decision he made. "You see it differently than I expected," she said quietly. "Humans do not always think linearly. You find solutions where others see problems." Eric nodded. "I try to consider the outcomes, not just the actions. Sometimes looking for patterns is better than forcing a result." She smiled faintly. "You are learning quickly, but there is more to loyalty than strategy. You must also show courage when there is no clear path, when decisions are dangerous." Their lessons were interrupted when a message arrived from the Queen. She requested Eric in the throne hall immediately. As he entered, he sensed the tension in the room. Ministers and attendants stood rigid, their eyes fixed on him, and the Queen herself appeared more serious than before. "Captain Dalen," Zyralaya began, her voice calm but commanding, "we have received troubling intelligence. There are factions within the Empire who doubt your presence here. Some believe your influence over my daughter is dangerous." Eric felt a wave of unease. He had known that not everyone would accept him so easily, but the stakes were now higher. "I understand, Your Majesty. I am willing to prove myself in any way you see fit." The Queen nodded slowly. "We will test your loyalty and judgment. You will participate in exercises designed to simulate high-stakes scenarios. How you respond will determine your standing in this court." The first test was immediate. Eric was escorted to a secure chamber where he was told to defend a simulated diplomatic convoy moving through a hostile territory. The holographic terrain was treacherous, filled with obstacles and potential ambushes. He had to guide the convoy safely, protecting resources and ensuring the survival of all involved. Eric observed carefully. He realized quickly that rushing or overreacting would only make the situation worse. Using careful planning, he positioned allies at key points, anticipated potential threats, and adjusted their path in real time. The holographic enemies adapted, but Eric remained calm, responding with precision and thought. By the end of the simulation, all the projections had reached their destination unharmed. Leora clapped softly, a rare smile spreading across her face. "You passed," she said, "but the next tests will not be so clear. You must trust your judgment even when the path seems uncertain." Over the next several days, Eric faced a series of increasingly complex simulations. Some tested his strategic thinking, others his moral judgment. He was forced to make difficult decisions, balancing the needs of the empire, the safety of its citizens, and the broader implications of each action. Each time, he emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of the delicate balance of trust and responsibility he carried. Meanwhile, his relationship with Leora deepened. They spent hours together analyzing simulations, discussing philosophy, and observing the patterns of Zarathian society. She shared her insights into her world, revealing how she saw connections and consequences that others overlooked. In return, Eric offered human perspectives, sometimes unconventional, sometimes risky, but always thoughtful. They learned from each other, bridging the gap between their species with understanding and mutual respect. One evening, as they observed the city from a high balcony, Leora spoke softly. "I do not understand why you humans act the way you do sometimes. You take risks that seem unnecessary, yet you often succeed where others fail." Eric smiled faintly. "Sometimes risks are necessary. Courage and careful judgment are not always opposites. They can work together." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the shimmering lights of the city below. "I think that is why I chose you. You do not fear responsibility, yet you do not act recklessly. You consider the consequences, and yet you move forward." Eric felt a surge of respect for her. "I am honored by your trust, Princess. I will not betray it." Their quiet conversation was interrupted by an urgent message. A simulation involving a political crisis had been activated, and both were needed immediately. The exercise involved navigating a dispute between rival factions within the empire, each claiming authority over a critical resource. The holographic figures moved with urgency, demanding resolution. Eric stepped forward confidently. He analyzed the situation, recognized the motivations of each faction, and proposed a compromise that satisfied both sides without causing conflict. Leora watched closely as he negotiated, impressed by his ability to remain calm under pressure. When the simulation ended, the chamber was silent for a moment. Then slowly, Leora clapped her hands. "You handled that exceptionally well. You see not only the patterns but the hearts of those involved. That is rare." Word of Eric's successes spread quickly through the court. Some ministers began to acknowledge his skill, while others remained wary. He understood that acceptance would not come easily, but he also knew that he was earning respect through action, intelligence, and integrity rather than words alone. One morning, Leora led him to a chamber he had not visited before. It was smaller, quieter, and filled with holographic star maps. "These are the outer territories of the Empire," she explained. "We must consider threats beyond our borders. You will help me analyze potential conflicts and plan strategies to maintain stability." Eric leaned over the star maps, studying the movements of fleets, resources, and potential adversaries. He suggested adjustments, offering human insight into strategy and tactics. Leora listened intently, occasionally challenging his assumptions, and together they developed plans that were both bold and precise. As they worked, Eric realized that his connection with Leora went beyond mentorship or instruction. It was a partnership built on trust, mutual respect, and shared purpose. The child had chosen him, not because of his rank or human ingenuity alone, but because of the qualities she recognized in him: courage, integrity, and the willingness to see the world through both human and Zarathian eyes. Late in the evening, as they returned to their quarters, Eric felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The challenges had been intense, but he had grown stronger, more confident, and more attuned to the rhythms of the Zarathian court. He knew that greater tests lay ahead, that the trust of the princess and the scrutiny of the ministers would continue to challenge him. Yet, for the first time, he felt a sense of belonging. He was no longer merely a visitor in this alien world. He was part of something larger, a connection that transcended species, status, and expectation. And he understood that the bond he shared with Leora could shape not only his future, but the future of humanity's place among the stars. As he prepared for sleep, he reflected on the lessons of the day. Courage, he realized, was not only about facing danger, it was about remaining true to one's principles, even when under scrutiny. Loyalty was not merely obedience, it was the willingness to act wisely and honorably, even when the outcome was uncertain. And trust, the most fragile of all, could be the key to bridging worlds. Outside the window, the city shimmered under the alien sky. Eric allowed himself a quiet smile. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with tests, intrigue, and potential danger, but he was ready. He had been chosen by a child of a queen, a gesture that had frozen a hall of powerful aliens. And now he had the chance to prove that humanity's strength lay not in weapons or force, but in courage, wisdom, and the ability to form bonds that mattered. For Eric Dallin, the journey was only beginning, and as he drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, he knew that the days to come would test every skill, every principle, and every ounce of trust he had been given. But he was determined. He would honor the choice of Princess Leora, navigate the challenges of the court, and demonstrate that humanity could not only survive among the stars but thrive, and perhaps, one day, be a force for hope, understanding, and lasting connection in a galaxy that had long doubted. Then the morning sun filtered through the palace towers, casting streaks of pale light across the corridors. Eric Dallin moved quickly, his mind alert, aware that the quiet of the palace often masked unseen dangers. He had grown accustomed to the subtle tension in the halls, the way the ministers observed his every action, and the quiet, intense gaze of Princess Leora that followed him wherever he went. That day, however, the tension in the air was different. It was heavier, charged with urgency. An urgent message had arrived from the outer city sectors. The palace had detected unusual activity, unauthorized vessels approaching the capital. They were unidentified, moving fast and deliberately. The queen summoned Eric to the throne hall immediately. As he entered, the room was already filled with ministers and high-ranking guards. The queen, Zyralaya, sat with her usual calm authority, but her eyes were sharper, focused. She gestured for Eric to step forward. "Captain Dallin," she said, her voice carrying both command and trust, "our sensors indicate a potential threat to the palace. You have proven yourself capable in strategy and judgment. I need you to coordinate the response alongside my forces." Eric's pulse quickened. This was no simulation. The stakes were real and lives were at risk. "I understand, Your Majesty," he replied, bowing slightly. "I will do everything in my power to protect the palace and the princess." Leora stepped forward, her small figure radiating calm authority. "I will assist you," she said. "We can work together to manage the situation. I trust you, Captain Dallin." The hall fell silent. No one had expected the child to involve herself in such matters. The ministers shifted uneasily, but the queen made no objection. She seemed to understand that the bond between Eric and her daughter could be the key to handling this crisis. Eric and Leora moved quickly to the command chamber, a room filled with holographic displays showing the approach of the unidentified vessels. The projections detailed their size, speed, and probable intentions. Eric studied them carefully. "These vessels are not ordinary traders or explorers," he said. "Their formation suggests they are prepared for confrontation. We need to act before they reach the palace perimeter." Leora nodded, moving her hands over the holographic controls, adjusting defenses and activating surveillance measures. "We can contain them without unnecessary aggression," she said. "But we must be precise. One wrong move could escalate the situation." Eric felt a surge of admiration for her. Despite her youth, she approached strategy with the calm efficiency of a seasoned leader. He realized that her intelligence was not only innate but honed by the responsibilities she carried as the heir of the Zorathian Empire. The first wave of vessels appeared on the outer perimeter. They were sleek, black, and silent, moving in patterns that suggested both coordination and cunning. Eric directed the palace defenses, combining human improvisation with Leora's precise calculations. Together, they adjusted energy barriers, deployed surveillance drones, and created decoys to confuse the attackers. The palace responded like a living organism. Energy shields shimmered into place, and automated defense systems hummed as they followed the commands of the unlikely human-alien team. Eric's instincts, honed through years of diplomacy and survival, complemented Leora's analytical mind perfectly. He anticipated potential weaknesses in the enemy formation, redirecting forces to protect vulnerable sectors. As the vessels advanced, a new threat emerged. The intruders deployed stealth units aimed at infiltrating the palace. Eric quickly realized that he would have to act personally. "Leora, cover the perimeter defenses," he instructed. "I will intercept the infiltrators." She nodded, her eyes sharp. "Be careful," she warned, though her voice carried no fear, only concern. Eric activated his mobility suit, a lightweight exoskeleton designed for agility and speed. The hallways of the palace blurred past him as he moved toward the points of infiltration. The intruders were fast, but they underestimated the combination of human adaptability and Zorathian architecture. Eric used the twisting corridors, energy fields, and shadows to his advantage, intercepting the stealth units before they could reach critical areas. The intruders were skilled, but Eric's quick thinking and understanding of their likely tactics allowed him to neutralize each threat efficiently. He did not harm them unnecessarily. His goal was containment and safety, not destruction. By the time he returned to the command chamber, the palace defenses had stabilized, and the remaining vessels had retreated from the perimeter. Leora met him with a faint smile. "You handled that exceptionally well," she said. "You did not act recklessly, yet you neutralized the threat. That is impressive for a human." Eric shook his head, catching his breath. "It is only because we worked together. You guided me, and I followed your strategy while adapting to the unexpected." The Queen entered the chamber then, her expression a mixture of pride and relief. "Captain Dalen," she said, "you have proven your worth beyond expectation. Your actions saved the palace and preserved the safety of my daughter. I am pleased to see that my trust was well placed." The ministers who had doubted him before were silent, their skepticism replaced by grudging acknowledgement. Some nodded subtly, others simply watched in thoughtful contemplation. Eric realized that the perception of humans in the Zorathian Empire had shifted in a single day. His courage, combined with Leora's guidance, had demonstrated that humanity could be a valuable ally, not a liability. Later, in the quiet of the evening, Eric and Leora returned to the balcony overlooking the city. The lights below twinkled like a field of stars, and the towers glimmered under the alien sky. Eric felt a sense of calm for the first time since the crisis began. "You handled yourself well today," Leora said softly. "The ministers are surprised. Some are still cautious, but I believe they respect you now." Eric smiled faintly. "I could not have done it without you, Princess. Your insight, your guidance, it made all the difference." She studied him for a moment. "I chose you because I could see your heart, Captain Dalen." You are not reckless, yet you are not afraid. You act with intelligence and honor. That is rare among humans and aliens alike. Eric felt a warmth in his chest. Trust was a fragile thing, and yet this child, the daughter of a queen, had placed hers in him completely. It was both humbling and empowering. Over the following days, Eric continued his lessons and duties. The ministers, while still cautious, began to involve him in more strategic discussions, testing his judgment in both simulations and real scenarios. Leora remained a constant presence, guiding him with patience and clarity. Together, they analyzed potential threats to the Empire, developed strategies to maintain stability, and even explored ways to strengthen relations between humans and Zorathians. Eric began to understand the depth of responsibility that came with being chosen by Leora. It was not simply a matter of trust. It was a signal to the entire empire that humans could be allies, capable of understanding and contributing to their complex society. He realized that his actions, both in strategy and in character, were shaping perceptions on a scale he had never imagined. One evening, as he worked alongside Leora in the strategy chamber, a new challenge arose. A faction of ministers had proposed a plan to expand the Empire's influence aggressively into neighboring star systems. Their plan was efficient but risky, with the potential to provoke conflict. Eric analyzed the proposal carefully, considering both the strategic and ethical implications. "Princess," he said, "this plan could succeed in the short term, but it risks destabilizing the region. There are ways to achieve influence without causing unnecessary conflict." Leora nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "You are right. Humans often see the long-term consequences that we may overlook. Present your alternative. Show the ministers that there is another way." Eric spoke with clarity and reason, explaining his proposal step by step. He outlined strategies that balanced growth, security, and diplomacy, minimizing risk while maximizing benefit. The ministers listened, some with skepticism, others with curiosity, and by the end, the room was filled with murmurs of approval. The queen observed quietly, her expression calm but her eyes reflecting satisfaction. She had trusted him before, and now his actions were validating that trust in a way that was visible to the entire court. That night, as Eric prepared for rest, he reflected on the days that had passed. He had faced tests, both simulated and real, that challenged his intelligence, courage, and character. He had acted decisively in moments of danger, collaborated effectively with Princess Leora, and earned the cautious respect of the ministers. And yet, he knew that the journey was far from over. The bond with Leora was growing stronger. It was built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and trust. She had chosen him without hesitation, and he was determined to honor that choice in every action he took. The crystal token she had given him pulsed faintly in his pocket, a constant reminder of the responsibility he carried. As he gazed out over the glowing city, Eric felt a sense of purpose he had never known. The palace had faced a real threat, and humanity's role had been proven not through force, but through courage, intelligence, and cooperation. He understood that this was the essence of what it meant to be trusted by the princess, and what it might mean for humanity's place among the stars. The future was uncertain. Challenges, both political and strategic, awaited him in the coming days. But for the first time, Eric felt that he was not alone. He had an ally in Princess Leora, a guide and a friend. Together, they could navigate the complexities of the Zorathian court, face dangers, and build a relationship between their worlds that was founded on trust, understanding, and courage. And for Eric Dalen, that was more than enough to move forward, one step at a time, into the unknown. The palace was quiet that morning, but the calm was deceptive. Eric Dalen could feel it in the air, the subtle tension that indicated something was about to happen. For days, he had been navigating the intricate halls of power, earning cautious respect from the ministers, proving his intelligence, courage, and integrity under the watchful gaze of Princess Leora and Queen Zyralaya. But he knew that the ultimate test was still ahead. Leora found him in the strategy chamber, her expression serious yet calm. "Captain Dalen," she said, "today is the final test. Not a simulation, but a real situation. Your decisions will have consequences for the Empire, for my people, and for the trust you have earned." Eric felt a mixture of anticipation and determination. "I understand, Princess. I will do everything in my power to act wisely." She nodded, then led him to the main observation hall. The holographic displays already showed the approach of multiple vessels, moving in formations that were unusual and aggressive. These were no ordinary threats. They were coordinated, intelligent, and capable of causing serious damage if allowed to reach the palace. Eric studied the movements carefully. The patterns suggested a deliberate strategy, likely aimed at testing the palace's defenses or probing for weaknesses. He could see the potential vulnerabilities and began planning a response. "We need to divide our focus," he said. "I will handle the infiltration points and perimeter, while you coordinate the defensive fleet and strategic barriers." Leora's eyes reflected both confidence and trust. "I will follow your guidance," she said. The palace responded as a living organism. Energy shields shimmered to life, automated drones patrolled the outer sectors, and the strategic fleet moved into position. Eric activated his mobility suit and moved swiftly through the corridors, intercepting stealth units attempting to bypass defenses. The intruders were skilled, but he anticipated their moves, guiding them into containment zones without unnecessary harm. Meanwhile, Leora coordinated the palace fleet with precision, deploying energy barriers and decoys that disrupted the attackers' formation. Together, they moved in synchrony, combining human adaptability with Zarathian strategy to neutralize the threat. As the situation progressed, a new complication arose. One of the intruder vessels had bypassed the defenses and was heading directly toward the central tower, where the Queen and Leora were located. Eric realized he would have to act decisively. He raced toward the central tower, calculating every possible approach, every potential outcome. The vessel approached rapidly, but Eric used the palace's internal defense systems to slow its advance. He deployed energy nets and redirected drones, creating obstacles that forced the intruder to alter its trajectory. Every second counted, and every decision had to be precise. Finally, he intercepted the vessel directly. Using his mobility suit, he attached stabilizing restraints to the craft and forced it into a containment chamber. The intruder crew was incapacitated but unharmed. Eric breathed a sigh of relief as the immediate danger passed. Returning to the observation hall, he saw Leora monitoring the remaining vessels. Her expression was calm, but he knew she had been fully aware of every move he made. The combined efforts had neutralized the threat, and the palace was secure. The Queen entered the hall, her expression a mixture of pride and authority. "Captain Dalen," she said, "you have demonstrated courage, intelligence, and loyalty beyond what we expected. You have earned not only my trust but the recognition of the court. Your actions have protected my people and upheld the values of this empire." The ministers, once skeptical, now bowed slightly in acknowledgement. Some spoke quietly among themselves, expressing admiration for his ingenuity and restraint. Eric realized that humanity's reputation in the Zarathian Empire had been transformed through his actions, and through the trust placed in him by Princess Leora. Leora stepped forward, her small figure radiant with quiet authority. She held out her hand and Eric took it, feeling a bond that went beyond words. "You have proven yourself," she said softly, "not just as a human but as someone worthy of trust, respect, and friendship. You are part of this empire now in a way few outsiders ever are." Eric felt a surge of gratitude and humility. "Princess Leora, I am honored by your trust. I will continue to serve with integrity and courage." The queen regarded the two of them with a softening expression. "The bond between you is remarkable," she said. "It is rare for a member of the court to recognize the value of an outsider so quickly, and even rarer for the outsider to respond with such understanding and skill. This is a sign that humanity has a place among the stars, and perhaps a future of collaboration and peace with our empire." In the days that followed, Eric continued his duties, but the nature of his work changed. He was no longer merely under observation. He was an advisor, a strategist, and a symbol of human potential in a galaxy that had long been wary of outsiders. He worked closely with Leora, analyzing threats, planning diplomatic initiatives, and strengthening the bonds between humans and Zerathians. The ministers who had doubted him began to see the wisdom in his perspective. His strategies were thoughtful, his decisions careful, and his courage unwavering. Even in moments of risk, he acted with integrity, earning the respect of those who had once questioned his presence. One afternoon, Leora brought him to the palace gardens, a vast expanse of alien flora glowing softly under the sky. The air was fragrant with the scent of unknown flowers, and the garden was alive with gentle movements, as if the plants themselves were aware of the visitors. "You have changed the perception of humans in the court," Leora said. "Not through force, not through status, but through your character. That is rare even among Zerathians." Eric smiled faintly. "I learned from you, Princess. You taught me patience, observation, and strategy. But I also learned from the challenges, from the need to act decisively when it matters most." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "That is why I chose you. You see the world with clarity, act with integrity, and adapt when necessary. That is the quality of a true ally." The sun set, casting long shadows across the garden. Eric felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a quiet awareness that the journey was ongoing. He had proven himself in moments of danger and uncertainty, but the real work of building trust, strengthening alliances, and navigating the complexities of interstellar diplomacy was never-ending. That evening, as he returned to his quarters, Eric reflected on the lessons of his journey. He had faced tests that challenged his intelligence, courage, and character. He had worked alongside an extraordinary child, guided by her insight and trust. He had confronted real threats and made difficult decisions, all while navigating the subtleties of a foreign court. And through it all, he had learned something vital. Humanity's strength was not in power alone, nor in force, but in courage, intelligence, and the ability to form bonds that transcended species, culture, and expectation. As he prepared for rest, Eric held the crystalline token Leora had given him. It pulsed softly in his hand, a reminder of trust, responsibility, and potential. He knew that the bond between him and the princess was not only personal but symbolic, a bridge between humanity and the Zerathian Empire, a promise of understanding and collaboration that could shape the future of both worlds. In the quiet of the palace, under the alien stars, Eric allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had been chosen by a child of a queen, a choice that had frozen a hall of powerful aliens and altered perceptions of humanity. He had risen to meet the challenge, proving that humans could stand among the stars, not through force or dominance, but through courage, intelligence, and unwavering integrity. The path ahead would have new challenges. Threats, both political and strategic, would continue to arise. But Eric Dalen knew that with trust, careful judgment, and the guidance of Princess Leora, humanity could face those challenges and thrive. He had been chosen, and he had proven worthy. The future of human-Zerathian relations rested in part on his actions, and he was ready to embrace that responsibility fully. The palace lights shimmered faintly around him as he looked out over the city, a landscape of beauty and complexity that reflected the delicate balance of power, trust, and intelligence. He understood now that courage was not just facing danger, It was taking responsibility, making difficult decisions, and acting with honor when the world watched and judged. And somewhere in the quiet of the palace, Princess Leora watched him with quiet satisfaction. She had made her choice without hesitation, and the human she had chosen had risen to meet it. Together, they had proven that trust, understanding, and courage could bridge worlds. For Eric Dalen, that was more than a test passed. It was a mission fulfilled, a promise honored, and a future begun. A future where humans and Zarathians could stand side by side, united by respect, trust, and the courage to face the unknown together. And in that moment, as the alien sky shimmered above and the palace settled into a calm rhythm once more, Eric felt something he had not expected. Hope. Hope that humans could belong among the stars. Hope that trust could change the course of empires. And hope that the choice of one extraordinary child could reshape not only his life, but the destiny of worlds. The journey had begun with a single, fearless choice. And now, after trials, strategy, and courage, that choice had created something lasting, an alliance, a friendship, and a promise that the galaxy had never seen before. Eric smiled, feeling the weight of the crystal token in his hand, and knew with certainty that he would honor that choice for as long as he lived. The entire hall had frozen when Princess Leora chose him without hesitation, but now the world was moving forward toward understanding, unity, and a future shaped by courage and trust. And Eric Dalen was ready to face it all.